to AviaDev Insight Live. This is John Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa, your African aviation platform dedicated to supporting the development of air connectivity to, from, and most importantly, especially for the future, within the African continent. Please forgive me for my festive appearance today. We're just getting in the mood. I'm sure a lot of you are getting ready for the festive period. So thank you all for joining us. This is episode, believe it or not, 147 of the podcast. And it's the 4th live episode of the only podcast dedicated to African aviation. So thank you, everybody who's joining us live. And for those who aren't, then thank you also for having a listen to the podcast and watching us back on YouTube. So great to have you with us. As you know, those of you who attended the previous sessions, our aim is to spend some time with the leading lights in aviation in Africa and to benefit from their knowledge and their experience so we can all develop a bit of a deeper understanding of how our great industry operates and may evolve as a result of the crisis that we found ourselves in 2020. And I'm sure there's lots of us that can't wait to see the back of 2020 itself. So it's also your opportunity to pose your questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted a question before the podcast today, which is great. I've got those lined up. So my very special guest for today's event, as you saw there in the trailer, is Adefunke Adeyemi, or Funke to her friends. And of course, as we're all friends here today, it's Funke to all of us, if that's okay with you, Funke. Good. So
thank you, John.
Great, fantastic. So to give you the big build up, and I'm not going to go through it all, but you know, Funke's been somebody who's been really important in my own journey with African aviation, has always been there, has been a familiar and welcoming face and somebody who's incredibly knowledgeable. And her experience is absolutely huge as well across the continent, and the passion is there as well. So we'll get a feel for that today. But to give you an idea of Funke's background without her having to go through it too much, right now, she was recently identified as one of the 200 most influential people of African descent. In her current role, Funke acts as the intermediary between airlines, the wider aviation community, governments, policymakers, and of course the general public. So it's a really important role at the moment as aviation is trying to find its feet again, and we're trying to understand how it's going to fit into this new world that we live in. She's also responsible for an ongoing campaign regarding the transformation of Africa's socio-economic prospects through improved air connectivity across the continent. So looking at this, what is the catalytic impact of air connectivity, and also introducing the concept of smarter regulation, which I'm sure is something we're all very keen to experience as a fundamental basis for sustainability. Funke is passionate also about empowering the female workforce to occupy senior management positions nationally, regionally, and globally through mentorship and training, focusing on competence and merit. And we're going to get into that in a bit of detail as well today. There's so much more to add, and I'm sure that's going to be touched upon in the next hour or so. Welcome to the podcast, Funke.
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, you know, we've been working together on this African journey for quite some time. I find it really remarkable that you're so passionate about our beloved continent, and we see you very much as a brother. So thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you. That means a lot. It means a lot. It's been a heck of a year, and it's been incredible connecting with everybody and doing things this way. And that's why I wanted to start with, you know, you're such a familiar face at events, but of course, 2020's taken those away from us, and we really know that as an event organizer ourselves. So we've all had to pivot, and we've all spent a lot of time sat in our bedrooms, offices, kitchens, wherever you may be, looking into a screen and dreaming about having those personal contacts. So how have you found 2020, and how have you found this sort of virtual world that we're living in nowadays?
It's been absolutely remarkable, John. I think I came back from my last trip of the year in the first week in March, and it's been, and now we're, you know, a week before Christmas, and I have to say that this has been the longest I've been in one place and of course at home for about 10 years. So this is quite interesting, you know, for me, and it's been a journey. The first 3 months of that journey were really just trying to grapple with the reality of what we had all been thrust into all of a sudden. You know, it was really very, very reactive and just trying to cope and trying to manage and trying to react as quickly as possible as we started to face the reality of the pandemic. So that was that. And then after the fourth month, when you're into the fourth month, this is working sort of almost 16-hour days, being available 24/7, having to wrap your head around the concept of the, WFH, working from home. And it really is quite different to, how we've been working for so many years and for so long. We've always talked about this concept of having a work-life balance, but this pandemic really brought that home. It was very, very difficult because people were shifting from one extreme right to the other, where a lot of people were finding that they were engaging so much at work and with trips and events, etc., and not as much at home. Well, now bringing work into the house, it made it quite different. So you're now working, from home, doing exactly the same thing and not really having time for family and friends. But into the fourth month of this, it was quite interesting. Like I said, it was good because I was with my mom. So I was doing some repairs to my place. So I came into the family house. So I'm still with my mom and my sister. And that really helped a lot. And I really want to speak to this now because I think it's the moment to talk about it. Because imagine if you've been living alone and you've not been able to travel or go anywhere, really, or really interact with people for the past 10 months. A lot of people are currently struggling with mental health challenges, with depression and acute loneliness. And this is something that is a real issue, and it's going to be an aftermath of the pandemic for a while to come. But anyway, I've found my groove working from home, and it's okay, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's really important, and it's part of the reason that we started things like this. Just if we can't be together, let's try and be together, and let's do it not in such a formal way that it feels so that you've still got those barriers. Like, let people in, let people kind of understand what's going on and share those experiences, because that's the one thing as an event organizer. Yes. We know that when you go to an event, the memories are built through shared experience. And I don't think that you can replicate shared experience in a virtual world. And everybody keeps telling me that can be done, but nobody can actually tell me how. So until even if we had virtual reality now and we were all sat in the same room, it's still not the same. And that there's a reason that hasn't taken off. So I think that's a great point, and we need to keep talking. We're very lucky. We're in a community with the African aviation community that's always been very welcoming to me, that is small, it's friendly, it's open, and we need to continue to have those conversations, because I can only imagine what a party it's going to be when we all get back together in person. It's going to be amazing.
We're all looking forward to that. I mean, for sure, John, as you just mentioned, it has its upsides, and it does have some challenges that come with it. One of the upsides has been that we really have forged a very strong relationship within this community virtually. Which perhaps we wouldn't have been able to do had we continued with, think before the pandemic. People had to travel long distances, the cost of travel, all of these things we're going to talk about anyway. But we really were able to get really great critical mass in terms of the engagements that we've been able to do. And that has been a big plus for the virtual thing. So for sure, I absolutely agree with you that the human condition abhors this negation of contact. And definitely we're looking forward to seeing that again. But there is a place for the virtual world, and how we integrate the two together is really what is going to shape the future.
Yeah, it was here before. That progress has just been accelerated. So absolutely. No, absolutely fantastic. So let's sort of start. It's a good question to kick us off, because I think it's an interesting topic that we're all grappling with. So it was interesting to see how you're dealing with that. Now, if we were to take away that bio that I provided at the beginning, that really sort of outlines, it's the corporate bio of Funke, but who is Funke? If you really scratch below the surface, what are you passionate about? How would you describe yourself if this was, not in that environment of you're on a panel session for whichever amazing organization is hosting it?
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, who am I? I guess I'm a product of my environment and my upbringing. And so I'll speak to those two first and foremost. My parents, my father was a professor of law, and my mother an entrepreneur and a woman of business. And I grew up in that household, having sort of both sides, academia with the structure, the rigor, and the business side, also with the structure, but also the street smart. So, you know, it was kind of a combination just growing up. And of course, going through school, you know, academia was quite important for us in our household. It was something that, you know, it was expected of us. And I always sort of wanted to go into, to be a lawyer and also to go into academia. So that was quite an interesting journey. But growing up in that household as well, I think it's important to share the kind of people that my parents were. My father's passed on now, but my mom is still here, as I mentioned earlier. And they were very sort of open-minded people, which I didn't realize until quite later, and as I grew in my own journey, that it's not the majority of people. They were open in terms of their mindset. They were open in terms of the allowing us to explore our curiosity. They were open in terms of embracing our choices and the people that we interacted with, but they provided good guidance. And they were quite strict, you know, and this is typical, I guess, for many African families. You know, you have a strict upbringing where you're not allowed to do certain things. But it really helped that this openness kind of, you know, helped us as the children of that family and everyone who came into contact with them to really be themselves. And that's something, again, that, you know, as I grew older, it wasn't something that was so easy. But so growing up in the environment, it wasn't just your parents, but it was a community of like-minded people, and, you know, everyone knew your business. But that also helped. You know, it was almost like taking a village to raise a child, and so you get the input from different places and different perspectives, and it really was a charmed, idyllic upbringing, which of course you don't realize until afterwards, because all the while you want to grow up and you want to go and do your own thing and be your own person. But, you know, that whole setup really gave me a great upbringing. What am I passionate about? You know, I'm passionate about the world working the way it's supposed to, the world working the way it should. And let me just drill that down into the word justice. Now, justice is not just about, you know, the legal ramifications. I'm passionate about, you know, people getting a fair shot. I'm passionate about everyone having an equal opportunity as it was intended for us all too. I'm passionate about everyone being able to explore their possibilities and potential to the fullest extent possible and taking advantage of every opportunity that's open to them. I'm passionate about Africa. I mean, it's my beloved continent. I'm so passionate about it and about our potential for self-actualization, to really realize, you know, our destiny, basically, as a continent. Of course, we'll talk about that later. I have, you know, a few interests. I read voraciously. I've always been reading. I started reading when I was 5, and, you know, I'm always, have a book everywhere around me, in my handbag, in my car. There's books everywhere. So if I'm traveling, you know, the worst thing that can happen, you know, forget about forgetting clothes and shoes. The worst thing that can happen to me is forgetting a book. And, you know, there's sometimes that it's happened, and I've gone to an airport where there's no bookshop, or there's no bookshop that sells books in a language that I can read. And that's really like, oh my God, what do I do now? But yeah, so that's one of my passions. I'm also a writer. So it's very strange. I used to write songs and poems and short stories, and all through my, you know, growing up. And I started writing as I became a lawyer. You know, helped me as well to hone my craft. So I started writing legal opinions and all of that, but just, you know, getting better and better at it. And interestingly enough, this pandemic has also helped me to go back into my writing. So I've written a few pieces, and I've just finished my book.
Oh wow, amazing! Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Well, we have a songwriter in our team, John Barcroft, who's on the call, who's one of our IATA trainers. Yeah, he's a bit of a songwriter himself. So maybe we can get something together. So
well, I think as well. So John, you can write the songs and I can sing it for you. How about that?
There we go. Right, we might finish today with a song. I don't know.
Oh well, let's not.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. And just taking it forward. So thank you for that, because I learned loads of stuff I didn't know, because again, we meet and you almost transact sometimes. You come together for a short period and you don't get to really have those in-depth conversations because everybody wants a piece of, they want to talk to you when you're at these conferences. So we're being pulled in 1,000 directions. One thing that I really want to bring up to the front, because quite often it's something that's left till the end of a conversation like this. And I mentioned it in the introduction about you being an advocate for female empowerment, but not just an advocate, actually a role model, because the role that you have shows that it can be done. And we know that in African aviation, there is a real lack of female leadership. Yes, there are some CEOs, female CEOs, but generally it's a very male dominated industry. And I guess what I want to understand, and I wanted to front load this, is what have you learned from your journey that equips the sort of future female workforce to dream bigger, aim higher? And do you think it's potentially more accessible now than it was when you were starting your career?
Thank you very much, John. So I think, again, the upbringing plays a key part, especially in our socialization. And this is one of the challenges that a lot of women face. It doesn't matter, whether you're African or not. Sorry about that, the beeping. We're just doing a change of power. This is the African way anyway.
That's fine.
So, exactly. So, the issue is that women, first of all, aviation is a male-dominated industry, and it doesn't just apply to Africa. It's all over the world. We did some research, I think back in 2017, we started looking at this in IATA and saying, well, how can we engage women more in our workforce? So it started out as an internal conversation. And then we started looking outward, and we did some research and found some astonishing numbers. First of all, I think we only had 3% of global airline CEOs who were women. And I don't think that number has moved much in that period of time. And in fact, in that number, we had an overwhelming majority from Africa. Okay, so we had maybe 5 or 6 African airline CEOs who were women, but that was a lot more than many other regions of the world. So that's the first thing. The second thing was we didn't have enough women in the technical roles, so pilots, engineers, technicians, etc. We had a preponderance of women in what you might call the softer skills, so management, human resources, typically cabin crew, ground staff, some of the other areas that seemed less technically challenging in any way that you wanted to cut it. And then the third thing we found was that 50% of business travelers, 50% of business travelers in 2017 were women, meaning that half of that population, which is quite a critical population or demographic that contributes to GDP, that contributes to job creation, were women. And so we needed to find a way of ensuring that using this data, we really were trying to ensure that women were given or at least presented with opportunities or given enabling environments for them to reach higher. Now, bringing it home to Africa, we have some issues in terms of unconscious bias. Again, it's not just for us, it's in different parts of the world, India, China, Asia, and other parts of the world, Latin America. But there are some issues that create barriers, natural barriers or subconscious barriers for women to attain their highest potential. One of them is socialization, how you are brought up, your upbringing, which I started with already. Are you brought up to believe that, a woman can only do certain things, girls can only do this, and boys can only do that? And that happens a lot subconsciously in our society, and this is a big issue. Another one is culture. Again, your culture could be that women are not allowed to do certain things while men are allowed to, boys and girls, and it starts while you're very young. And of course, we have this thing called unconscious bias, where we as women have a tendency not to go for certain things, positions, promotions, jobs, applications, unless we're 100% qualified for that position. Whereas our male counterparts, you guys, you know, even if you have 30% of the qualification, you would, because, you know, the socialization, the conditioning, you know, even your physiology lends itself to, I'm going to go for it, you know, to that go-getting approach. So one thing that I learned is that thankfully I was brought up to believe that I could do anything. I really was. And it wasn't even like, you know, I had somebody playing a mantra in my head. It was just the way things were. I could do anything. I played, you know, with the boys just as I played with the girls, and I could do anything. I was a bit of a tomboy actually growing up, so maybe I don't know, maybe that helps as well. But one thing I learned on my journey, which started in aviation when I was 32 years old, I was appointed as the company secretary and head of legal for an airline, Virgin Nigeria at the time. I think I might have been the youngest company secretary of a big company at that time. I didn't even realize it until a year later when one of the national papers came to do a story. So, you know, it wasn't something that was front of mind, a top of mind, but yes, the typical thing, not just in aviation, but in corporate world, in corporate business, and in even entrepreneurship, was that the older, the better, because the older you are, you have more experience. And so people that tended to be in those kinds of positions were older. So what I learned on my journey, especially in aviation, and since I started, not just covering Africa, but also having covered Middle East for some time, is this, and what I call the 4 C's. 4 C's is that the first C is confidence. You know, that is everything. That's your calling card. That's your entry. That's your leg in the door. Without confidence, it's very, very difficult to achieve anything in life. And I'm saying this, you know, just not just, you know, for the younger people, but for anyone who's listening. Confidence is absolutely fundamental. And I don't mean it in the sense of, oh, arrogance and swagger. I'm talking about belief in yourself. When you believe in who you are, you can do anything. You believe that, okay, I can, and I am, and I'm worthy, and I'm good, and I can just go with it. That just helps. That's half of the problem, any problem solved. The second is competence. So of course you've got to be confident, but you don't want to don't have any substance to back up your confidence, right? So you know, you have to. People tell me, "Oh, Funke, you talk a good talk," and I'm like, well, okay, I try to ensure that it's not just about the talk, and I know at least to an extent a bit of what I'm talking about. So competence is really important. When you stand before an audience, especially in my role that is an advocate, that is going forward to promote positions and to try to motivate decision makers to take specific actions for the benefit of our industry, but also for the benefit of, you know, people generally, of economies, it's important that you're credible, that you know what you're saying, you know what you're talking about, and you know how to engage with your stakeholders. And so competence is so important. And I've done a few sort of mentorship and women in leadership trainings. And when I get to this point, I always use a colloquial term. And I tell them that whenever I, you know, go to speak to someone, I over prepare and I kill it when I get there. You know, that's my plan. So that my mindset is, you've got to do the best that you can do in this moment. And I prepare that way. And I you know, I mentally center myself that way. And I think that's really important. The third thing is what I call capital. Now, of course, capital means, you know, money and all of that in typical parlance. But I mean this in the sense of your own personal brand. Who are you? Who do people say you are? So I know who I am. I've said a bit of what people didn't know, but I do know, you know, a bit of what people say. And you said a bit of that, you know, Funke is a strong advocate, or Funke, you know, is going to be able to tell a position, or she presents well, and so on. Whatever it is that anyone says about me, there is it's because I've cultivated through my work, through my experience, something that I'm showing and putting forward to the world. So who do people say about you? You want people to say you're dependable, you're, you know, reliable, you're loyal, the good things. That's what we want people to say about us. I'm not saying that, you know, we're all perfect. So we're certainly not, we're all flawed. But what you want to put forward is the good about you. So you need to cultivate a niche and create your own personal brand. And that becomes your capital. That's your calling card. And then the fourth one is charisma. And I think this one is so important. So all of the three are important, you know, but I know we're being informal here, so I'm going to use the word, you've heard of the word jerk. So you can be a really good jerk. You can be as competent as you like, and you can, you know, do all the best things. But if you're not a likable person, it's just, you know, it's not a complete picture. And for this in particular, is very important for women, because sometimes when we, especially as we grow higher in the corporate ladder, or as we become more successful as women, we somehow feel like we have to be, you know, tough and nasty. And yes, of course, it's a tough world out there and you have to hold your own, but you don't have to be nasty. So likability is not a sign of weakness. It is actually a strength. If you're charismatic, you're likable, you're pleasant, you know, it doesn't take anything away from you. So these are the four things that I learned in my journey, and it helped me a lot, especially when I was covering the Middle East, because of my demographic. I mean, I am who I am, but I found that it didn't matter. It didn't make a difference, because the four C's, you know, were with me all the time, and they really helped me break those barriers. And so that really is my message to women. You know, no matter where you find yourself, we need to grow up higher. Women contribute significantly more to organizations and help profitability, help productivity, and so many other things in terms of senior management. So if you're a woman listening to me now, please, you know, try to make sure that you're going for broke, you're leaning in, and you're doing what it takes, using the four C's as a guide. And I believe that, you know, there are a few countries, just as I wrap up on this point, that there are a few countries that have taken the opportunity and seized the moment to spotlight women. So we have Rwanda, who have it as a government policy that have, you know, 65% of their cabinet is women, and many of their top positions in, you know, across the board are women. South Africa has a very similar policy as well, and they're doing very well on this. We have a few of our, you know, North African countries who are also moving forward, but it's not nearly enough. And that's the real message here. We really need to move the women and build the pipeline, move them through that pipeline. And everyone has a responsibility. So of course, you as a person have the responsibility to yourself, but the people in organizations, the seniors, the men have an opportunity. Identify the good people, the talents that you know are good, and bring them up, help them up. And one of the best examples that I can share on this is that when I started in IATA, I had a very good mentor. When I was in Virgin, I had a very good mentor and sponsor. In IATA, I had a very good mentor who really sort of helped me very gently and very quietly to realize that, you know, just be yourself and just go and just keep going. And that really helped me. And that was early on when I joined the organization. And finally, one of my mentees, Fadimatu, I'm sure you all know her. She was given an award under the 25 by 2025 campaign that IATA launched last year, which was addressed at this particular thing to get more women in senior management, 25% more women across the board in aviation, and also to get more women in technical roles. And Fadi was given the award, and I was really proud that I had an opportunity to mentor such an amazing woman. Sorry, I've taken so much time on this.
No, not at all, not at all. And you know, I'm really encouraged by the number of organizations that we work with as well. So there's Komotso down in Botswana, there's Refilwe in South Africa, there's Mafu in Zambia. You know, these guys are doing great things, but there's lots. Some people are focused on women, some people are focused on youth. I think one thing that you said as well is that technology is changing this. It's disrupting the old guard that actually maybe in this day and age, we need this new breed of people to to come through. So let's move into the kind of current affairs, what's happening.
Right.
Obviously, you explained you've been with IATA now 11 years. You were with Virgin Nigeria, as you explained, for 5 years before that. And we need the industry to survive. I was at the African Development Bank event where you presented, and the stat that stuck with me, because I like the simple stats, was that every African passenger carried this year by an airline has cost on average $42 in terms of as a loss, which is completely unsustainable. So the big starting question here is, are governments doing enough to support the sector right now?
Well, John, I think we can all agree that the pandemic has been the single most devastating event for aviation, since aviation started properly in the about 75 years ago. It really has been. This is sort of worse than 9/11, the Great Depression, and the economic recessions we've seen since then. This really has been uh, far-reaching in so many ramifications that we could never have imagined. To have the entire world fleet grounded, I think up to about 85% at one point, that is something that I don't think has ever happened. It's unprecedented. And so because of that, and the fact that it was so far-reaching, you're grounding the aircraft, meaning that you're grounding the people who are servicing the aircraft, meaning that you're grounding the ground staff, meaning that you're grounding the suppliers, meaning that you're grounding, and so on. So the whole ecosystem of aviation revolves around the airline. I know that people say, oh, you're so concerned about the airline only. No, the whole ecosystem revolves around airline operations. The airports are there because passengers are going to fly through, they're going to be facilitated through that unit. The airspace is there because the planes are flying, and so on. The fuel suppliers are there because the plane needs the fuel, the caterers, and so on. Even the back end, the IT, that's the reason why. And so because all of this had come to such a screeching halt, it really, really impacted in a way that no one could have imagined. And that's why we started early on in the early days. Like I mentioned to you that the first 3 months was really pumping to try to engage with governments, to try to get them to realize just exactly how far-reaching this was and how debilitating it could be, not just for the industry, but for the industry that supports the economies and the livelihoods of people as well. So this was really a big challenge. Now, in terms of what has happened since then, how have governments supported the industry? We've been advocating for months and months, and we continue to do so. Relief remains a critical issue. And over the period, we've seen financial relief of, I think, a total of about 173 billion US dollars from all around the world. And these are primarily from, some of the larger major carriers in North America, in Europe, and a few in Asia and Latin America. We haven't seen so much in Africa, and the ones that we have seen are largely from the national carriers, government support to the national carriers. We've seen, I think, about over $2 billion support has come to airlines in Africa as direct cash injection or as loans or credit facilities and
a lot
other
of that's
concessions.
A lot of that's in North Africa, isn't it? There hasn't been quite so much. There's been a lot in
exactly.
In
exactly. I mean, we can name that. So Morocco, I think they had $600 million to RAM.
That's a big chunk of that
it's a big chunk. It's a big chunk of it. And then we have smaller numbers as you go down. So in total, over $2 billion, not nearly enough. And now you mentioned the number of $42 being lost by African air carriers. Let's just go back to 2019 when the loss was $1.56. So you just imagine, so already we were loss making and now the pandemic hit and everyone has been affected, no matter who, even if you had the largest war chest, because it had been so far reaching, and even if you were running the business profitably, properly, it affected everyone. So now bring this home to the fact that we have, this colossal losses. The government relief is not enough. And we as at IATA, wear my IATA hat now, we're advocating for support to all airlines and mainly now in the form of grants or credits more than loans or debts. And if the governments have to give loans, then, at very favorable sort of low single-digit interest rates, because the airlines are already loss-making. They're already, starting from, ground below zero. And then we're adding debt onto this. So it's quite a conundrum for the airline community. We advocate, of course, for support to all of the airlines. I know that in some quarters, it has been said that some of the African airlines aren't run properly, or as businesses, and it's like government is just putting money into these ventures that that may not be sustainable in the long run. But without that initial support, at least as a starting point, we really is very difficult to get start of operations. We've seen already that how many airlines are back up flying. It's certainly not the 100 and something AOCs that we have, or airlines that we have in Africa, back together to get into the air. Now, we have some pledges. We did some great advocacy jointly with AFRA, with ASA in Southern Africa.
Chris is on the call. Chris is here.
Ah, great.
Yeah.
Hi, Chris. With the UN World Tourism Organization, with the WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council, and IATA. And we wrote to international donor organizations. The industry is at a standstill, travel and tourism. So it wasn't just aviation, it was wider to hospitality and to tourism. And we said, look, we need support. And we asked for $10 billion. And we got some feedback, some of them saying, look, we are providing support directly to the government. So, go and engage with the government. We got some saying, okay, we'll look into it and see what we can do for you. We also had a big pledge from the African Union through the high-level task force for the restart and recovery of aviation that was set up by the African Union Commission. It was excellent. How quickly the African Union and its institutions reacted to this crisis. I really must commend the institutions for this. And they brought everyone together, the entire ecosystem of the industry together to ask, okay, what are the challenges? What are the issues? What do you need? And how much do you need? And so altogether, we came up with a bill of $25 billion, which, was given to them. And that's what we presented to the Africa Development Bank. So there's pledges out there. I think, with also what is out there with Afrexim Bank, who has the facility ready for both states. All in all, it's about $30 billion that we're looking at that's available, or at least that's on the table as pledges. Now, in terms of what's happening, we've had that conference with the AFDB. I know that they're working on coming up with some recommendations and reports on how the funds can be accessed. And I think that's really important. So how do you access the funds? The airlines, and this goes back to the question of, who are you? What kind of airline are you? If you're going to speak to a bank and you have, credible accounts, you have a good business plan, and these are things that really help to give you the credibility that the bank wants to see that you're a good customer. It's really something that supports the argument that the whole industry is making, that the airlines need to be supported. So that's really, I think, a key message here. We're still waiting to get the outcomes from the bank on how we start to engage on these issues. We've provided all the information that has been requested, and we're hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's such a difficult one. I understand that. I mean, obviously, if you're a loss-making airline in a good environment, what makes you think that you're going to make profit in a much tougher environment? And could that money that's used to keep them afloat end up just being lost anyway, because we're keeping them alive on life support, but they can't survive in the new market that exists? And the other, that's the thing with accounts. You can go and show your accounts and say, hey, we were a sustainable, but actually, are you going to be? I'm not saying it's easy, but just on that, and it's a similar question, but we had a question from Nella, who's on the call. She's a A330 pilot, formerly of Rwandair. She's based over in Belgium now, and it's interesting. She says, the unsustainable government-run carriers, the ones that are unsustainable, obviously we know that there's a couple that aren't, they keep disrupting the field in terms of the private airlines, and there isn't an African body with sufficient power to regulate the industry as a whole, be it continent-wide or regional. So how do we get out of that? Should IATA, AFRA, and the other stakeholders take a different, more disruptive position? Because if we continue to justify the existence of inefficient government-run carriers just for the sake of socio-economic growth, there won't be any end. We'll just be in a vicious cycle. So it's a tough one, but what do you think to that comment?
I think it's a great comment. It really touches on a lot of the fundamental issues that we need to address here. The first thing is that we do not advocate for unsustainable business. We actually advocate the opposite, for sustainability in the industry. And we've been advocating for a long time that there's several ways and pathways to sustainability. From the airline point of view, I mean, speaking to our own constituency, we have been advocating for some time now that we need to ensure that we're running our businesses properly, ensuring better efficiencies, ensuring better cooperation, ensuring collaboration, and perhaps even consolidation. The winner takes all mentality that pervades in Africa, it's not a sustainable way forward for African aviation, especially looking at the fact that out of our population of 1.2 billion, it's only a tenth of that is traveling by air, about 100 million only. That's because the markets are fragmented, the routes are, and the volumes are thin on the routes, because you have this multiplicity of, of airlines who maybe are not playing well together. And that's really the key here. We can play well together. And we just need to be able to understand that. The winner takes all mentality does not help. You cannot be, the king or the winner when you're fighting for, a zero-sum pie or game. So it's a very valid point she raises about how do we ensure that we can get out of this and that the system is regulated in a great way. And I think that this is the point that brings me back to the smarter regulation part. So this is the lawyer in me speaking now. We've been advocating for smarter regulations generally for aviation industry, which is, regulation that really supports sustainability and growth of an industry. Now, the regulatory framework and environment for aviation in Africa, it needs to be strengthened. We have opportunities under the umbrella of the African Union and AfCFTA to do this. We've all heard about the SAATM, and I'm going to bring it in now, the Single African Air Transport Market. And under that, there's a framework agreement, which is the Yamoussoukro decision, the famous YD. And under that framework agreement, there are supporting regulation which speak to competition rules, which speak to dispute resolution, and speak to consumer protection. And on top of that, you have each country that has their own national regulations to govern or oversee civil aviation based on ICAO standards, recommended practices, and the Chicago Convention, and so on. So we have a and then we have the African Civil Aviation Policy. So the issue is, what are we doing as African aviation in a concerted collective whole to regulate our industry in a way that supports initiatives like the SAATM? We've heard this issue about the field, and I think Nola's comment speaks to that. You have the comments about certain kinds of airlines who are disrupting the others, who are trying to do well. Well, this is the thing. So some of the challenges to the SAATM are this very point about the field, having a level playing field. And this speaks to several issues. It speaks to the competition rules. How strong are you? How strong and balanced are your competition regulations? It speaks to your economic regulation of airlines and of the aviation system. We have general individual corporate governance rules for companies that are run in countries, but how strong is the economic regulation of the industry to ensure that sustainability is something that is monitored as part of the oversight functions of the civil aviation authorities? How can we bring this up through a continental level, through the African Civil Aviation Policy and the YD and the supporting regulations? There's a lot of work to be done here. And also there's a huge a need for capacity building and sensitization of the regulators in the states of the airlines on what these provisions are, what they say, and what they're supposed to do. So there's a lot of work still to be done. quite all right. We've made a lot of progress in the past 5 years in terms of moving us closer towards achieving realization of a single African market. But we're now, right now, at the point where we've got to face, the details. The devil is in the detail. This is now when we need to go into all of those regulations and compile them and do a sensitization for states and airlines. This is what YD says. These are what the regulations say. This is what the African Civil Aviation Policy say. This is the harmonization of all of these elements in terms of how we can practicalize it for sustainable airline operations. And the airlines themselves also need to know that, don't be so afraid. Don't be so afraid of YD. Don't be so afraid of cooperation, because YD really speaks at the heart of YD. It's all about cooperation. Don't be so afraid to play with each other. Don't be so afraid to connect, to collaborate, and to cooperate with each other. So there's a lot of meat in Nola's comment, but I think we need to start with, at the institutional level, with what we already have in existence, with all of these regulations and policies that I've mentioned, and see how we distill all that down into practical implementation across the board. And on that point, final point is, on the industry side, we have the AAIG, which is the African Aviation Industry Group.
Shamsu's with us, yep.
Oh, okay, great. And we're working with them to see how we can really collaborate together to ensure that we are moving the needle on the SAATM implementation. So what we are coming up with for a work plan for 2021 that we'll be taking to these institutions, to the AU, to AFCAC, and all of the other, ICAO and all the other players, is looking at identifying what we're calling the crew, the countries or carriers that are ready, eligible, and willing to go into this. So it's just bring a small group together, 6, 5, 3, doesn't matter. Let's just show that it can be done. But that means we're going to have to go step by step, piece by piece, to ensuring that all of these issues that have been laid up on the table are properly addressed.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I hope that answers your question, Nella, because I know Nella's also doing her MSc on this subject as well. So
okay.
She's studying, she does all these things. So it's pretty awesome. And yeah, I mean, I take your point about the free and fair side of things. I mean, look at what's happened in South Africa with the with SAA lying dormant. You've got Airlink launching routes left, right, and center. You've got real strong domestic competition driven by private carriers. So of course, the beneficiaries are the traveling public, because these carriers are fighting. Lyft started last week. Safair is there, Airlink is there, Kalula's back in the skies, and there isn't that national carrier that's sort of, and this is what worries me, I suppose, is when this money is apportioned, if it only goes to the national carriers, how do the private airlines stand a chance? Because there's unfair competition by definition if they're being given that money. But we'll sort of park that one for now, move on to something else, because you mentioned SAATM, and I was there in January 2018 for the launch, for the signing at the African Union. And that will be 3 years next month since I was there. And of course, what we've seen is there were 3 flagship projects. There's the Continental Free Trade Area, there's the visa facilitation, the uni visa, ease of movement, and then of course SAATM for the aircraft. And African Continental Free Trade Area is 30 days or whatever it is. I see the countdown from launch, which is amazing. Yeah. So my question to you is, can that be successful without SAATM and without the other parts falling into place quickly behind it, or is it not going to realize its full potential?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, SAATM is a critical enabler to the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area, just simply because of the sheer size of Africa. I mean, we've talked about this many times before, but I think that what this means is now going to be really underscored when the AfCFTA comes into full implementation, in a few days' time. And it's because you're supposed to be moving people, goods, and services across Africa. We still don't have the robust alternative in road and rail. For sure, I believe that Africa needs an intermodal system that works together. So we need it all. I mean, rail is fundamental in many economies. Rail really moves a lot of goods, big goods together, shipping, and name it. It all works together. But aviation is your leapfrog transportation mode. Because of our ability to cross borders with speed, you can get anywhere in the world within a 24-hour period. You can do the same here in Africa. Now, the challenge or the issue is, what are the kinds of goods that you can carry by air? Okay, that's a fair point. But our analysis, our ATAG report that just came out the other day, $3.1 trillion of goods are carried by air. That's a huge amount of in terms of value. So 0.5% of volume, but about almost 40% in value. So yes, Africa has a lot of value products. We can carry that. Perishables, food, minerals, mineral resources, gold, diamonds, even medicaments, blood, plasma. These are things that we can carry. These are the top 10 traded goods I'm talking about here. And these are things that we produce easily in Africa. Number two, we have to start seeing, Africa needs to start seeing itself as its own market, all right? And not just thinking about what is happening outside. Of course, we have to play with everyone and you need to be connected with the rest of the world. But there's a huge market in Africa. So let me take Nigeria as an example. We're called the bread basket because literally, I mean, I've seen this, all my life. You just throw a seed on the ground and it grows. You don't need to do anything. It is fertile land. It is, you can grow anything. So we grow a lot of food. Even internally, a lot of our food wastes before it gets to market because of the logistics of getting them to market and moving them out. But if we have cargo facilities for export in the close enough to the farms, we can export to all the places in Africa that need food. We still have our brothers and sisters in many countries that are dying of hunger. Why can't we play that role? And so this is what our AfCFTA is supposed to do. AfCFTA, SAATM is going to be absolutely critical for moving the people and the goods together. Now, of course, it has to work hand in hand with the free movement protocol. So it's not just visas, but also customs facilitation so that you can move goods easily. This all is under a continental tariff umbrella. These all need to work together. So the SAATM is not just of benefit in itself, not just for the industry, it's just of benefit to achieving the realization of a regional integrated and prosperous Africa. The three need to walk hand in hand.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I get my Kenyan sugar snaps from Astral Aviation from Sanjeev. It comes into Doncaster and then it's in my supermarket and, and it's fantastic. It's fresh. It's great, and I always look for that. Where can I get my African vegetables? And maybe it's easier for me than some of the people on the call to get hold of those things. Almost undoubtedly it is, and that's, I think that's the point is we have to, when we set up Aviadev, it was all about looking close to home first. We know that airline economics, if you can fly a domestic route 10 times a day, you're going to make a lot more money than flying one intercontinental flight every 3 days. Yet there's an obsession with these kind of long haul and wide body aircraft and all the rest of it. And that can be driven by the politics. So we won't get into that too much. So for everybody joining, I know we've got about 4 minutes, but if it's okay with everyone, we'll stay for another 10 or so. So if you have to go, we are recording. It will be available on YouTube and on podcast. But we've had some questions in, so I just want to go through those and give everybody their bit of a quick fire round for you, Funke. So the first one's from Clive, who is actively involved down in Zambia, but is in Lincoln today. And he's also an IATA trainer. And he says, with your IATA hat on, what influence do you think your new leader, Willie Walsh, is going to have in Africa?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I think that he has a great reputation as a seasoned aviator and businessman. And I think that it is going to definitely be an interesting journey for us with him at the helm of leadership and with Africa. Of course, we don't have much detail for now because, of course, he's still not yet in the role and will obviously be coming to terms and just learning the ropes a bit. But just in terms of looking at the former group of companies that he was heading, we know that they have a very special role and a special place in Africa, and they've been flying flying and operating into this region for, over 70 years. So that, if that is an indication, then I think we have some exciting things to look forward to.
Great, great. And we've got a question from Franklin Amondi, who is from AFCAC. And he wants to ask about the environmental protection. So environmental protection is key and fundamental for the sustainability of African aviation. Under the context of SAATM and the projected growth of intra-African travel, the impacts on the environment will obviously be in sharp focus. How do you see African aviation stakeholders addressing this need for sustainability environmentally and the need to build African aviation back better? So what are the urgent environmental protection issues that need addressing?
Thank you very much, Franklin, for that question. Franklin, actually, I've got to say, has been one of the people who has championed the environmental agenda in Africa. So thank you for all of the work that you've done and your support. I think that, it's a very, very good question. Just first of all, globally, our attention is still on our environmental responsibility, I've got to say. So irrespective of what has happened with the pandemic and how disruptive it has been, we really have been quite focused on this issue, and we have continued to work on it. So the first thing is that the CORSIA, which is the carbon offsetting reduction scheme for international aviation, is supposed to address some of those environmental challenges that Franklin refers to in the way that offsetting works. So as you fly, the whole idea behind offsetting is that for every flight that's taken, the carbon emissions from that flight are able to be offset through a sustainability or environmental project where it is needed the most. We know, of course, that climate change is a big issue, and many parts of Africa face severe challenges of deforestation, of drought, of the waters drying up, and so on. And these are big issues. But even beyond that, we just have the domestic issues, if you like, where people are still using a lot of coal to cook and to fuel, and some of the challenges that come with that. So aviation is actually contributing directly to addressing these issues. Some of these projects, we have a few already that have been established over the years. Kenya Airways had a few that were making cotton t-shirts in a village in one of the provinces, as well as helping to swap out the fuel, the coal fuel cooking apparitions that the local women were using for more sustainable ones. And there's several others, but CORSIA is the thing that we're still focusing on. And during the course of this year, we were able to continue with the CORSIA project, and we shifted the baseline to 2019 because the baseline was supposed to be for 2020, but because there was hardly any flying for most of this year, we moved that forward, and the African group in ICAO were very supportive of this initiative. In terms of going forward, we're also continuing with our focus on the environmental agenda, which is to ensure that we can begin to commercially scale up sustainable aviation fuels, which we believe will be a critical factor in addressing aviation's carbon footprint. And Africa has a role to play here. Of course, taking into account food security and so on, we won't be interfering with, the natural order of things, but there are plants like there's a plant in Solaris plant in South Africa that's a form or derivative of the tobacco plant, and that South African Airways back in the day and a few other airlines had used for biofuels and used for flights already. So there's several examples that we can still play on. We need to the resources that we have available part on that issue. Finally, because of the pandemic, there's been a lot more of a different kind of cabin waste, masks, plastics, and some of the PPEs used. And we're also looking at focusing on those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. The sustainable aviation fuels, we've done an episode of the podcast on that with somebody who did their thesis, and we talk all about it. So you can find that in the back catalogue, no worries. And the other things, as a result of the pandemic, of course, the older aircraft have been retired, the ones that were worse from an efficiency perspective. And I think going forward, airlines are going to have to look for those efficient aircraft. As we know, they're going to have to look at that. And the final thing on that, potentially, which is something for AfCFTA and IATA, is if you look at what's happened with the bailout money, or the, however you want to call it, the support money in Europe for Lufthansa, for Air France, KLM, it's actually been tied to environmental conditions. So they've said you can have this money, but it has to be, you know, there's this, that, and the other that's there. So I think that could also be quite an interesting thing to consider if it's going to be a kind of pillar going forward. So final question for you, and it's a big one, Funke. Okay, it's a big one. So prepare yourself. So, you know, you've explained to us today, you've shown it through your career, through your life. You are absolutely a Pan-Africanist. You believe in Africa, looking after Africa itself first and foremost. Do you think the experience of COVID, this shock for the whole world, will drive Africa apart or bring it together?
It's a great question, John, and I think it's a perfect place to end. I think that this is an opportunity for Africa to really, really come together and stand as one. I want to share with you an example of something that I saw on Flight Radar 24 in September. There was hardly any flights over Africa. You know, it's a real life picture of what flying looks like, you know, at any point of the day. And this morning, I took a snapshot, and there was hardly any flights over Africa. But there were flights in pockets within the different sub-regions of Africa. And to me, that just told me the entire story that I needed to know, and that I feel that everyone in Africa needs to know. We are enough in our own right. We are the ones who can build up our market internally to the strength that we need it to be. We, of course, are not isolating ourselves from the rest of the world, and we should and do cooperate with the wider world, with the international sphere. But within Africa, because Africa was closed to the rest of the world, not because we closed our doors, but because we were closed to the rest of the world. Till today, the only country whose nationals can go into Europe, to European borders, is Rwanda. Yeah. No other country can go in unless you have, or national of a country in Africa can go in. Not even, you know, North Africa, Morocco, no, none. At first, it was Rwanda and Tunisia to start off with at the beginning, and then the list was revised, and it was only Rwanda. So my point is, and these are the big source markets into and outside of Africa. So this is the moment, this is the opportunity that we have to really try to build back better and stronger within Africa, while we continue to cooperate and collaborate with our, you know, counterparts, brothers and sisters outside the rest of the world. And I've always said this before, that this, you know, when African carriers in particular are going outside of the continent, of course, these are commercial decisions, and every airline is entitled to pursue their business plan and their business model. But as you said, John, when you have, you know, domestic flights and you're doing, you know, 7 to 10 returns a day, you do make more money. I mean, this has been tried and tested and proven. Yeah. Same with regional. If you're doing that, you'd make more money. Yep. It's a different business model to do a long haul flight. So how about we try to concentrate on penetrating our markets with the airlines that we have within Africa? Not saying not do the long haul, not at all. I wouldn't, you know, I can't do that. But concentrate a little more on looking inward within the continent. This is the moment. I already believe that the pandemic has brought us together. As I mentioned, we have been more engaged than we ever have before as an aviation community across the entire continent. It has been helped by technology for sure, but I believe that even after things ease off with maybe a vaccine and all of that, we know that a vaccine is coming up, and maybe this is a time for me to talk about it. So we have the vaccine, it's already been announced. We have some, you know, governments who are already starting to distribute the vaccine in the US and in the UK. We see from, you know, some of the projections that it's probably going to take a while longer to get to Africa. One of the challenges that we face, of course, is the connectivity problem that we've been talking about already. You know, because we're not as well connected as we can be, it's going to take longer to get these vaccines across to our people. So these are some of the challenges that we face. Connectivity will help support these kinds of issues, distribution of vaccines. We have a few hubs that can accommodate them: Johannesburg, Addis Ababa, Kenya to an extent, and I think Dakar because of Institut Pasteur, because of the cold storage pharmaceuticals. You know, the capacity to be able to do these things is very, very important. And so until a vaccine is found, and until the vaccines can come, I mean, they're found quite all right, but until they can be distributed as widely across the world, we need to find a way of supporting each other. And that's what I would say that the airlines need to do. So connectivity is not just because we're talking about SAATM, it's brought to life now by this pandemic. This is the moment where we really need to come together and work together to see how we can better connect Africa. This is a moment for us to really stand together, to really unite as a continent. And I think that, you know, we must seize it. I know we've seen some of that, some of those examples already, but we must seize this opportunity. I believe it will bring us together and not drive us apart.
Amazing. Well, what a rallying call to end a truly terrible year for everybody, I think. But there's been some good bits as well, but that was absolutely awesome, Funke. I want to say a massive thank you to you for spending the time with us today. I feel like, you know, I feel uplifted for the rest of the day now, and looking forward to 2021. And I'm sure a lot of people are closing the books today, putting the laptop down. So make sure, like Funke said earlier on, you take that time, spend that time. Don't just be present, turn it off and be present properly. Thank you so much, Funke. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, John. And thanks to all the participants, for everyone who joined. I'm so sorry I couldn't see most of your comments because without my glasses, I can't read a thing.
So I just had your glasses.
So, but I will catch up with all the comments. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Compliments of the season and happy holidays to everyone.